debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Saturday afternoon. We're talking about Holy Week and the historical development to it, joined by Father Deacon Daniel Galadza, who is a theologian and a deacon in the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Father Deacon, how are you? And welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, really excited to have you on. And tell us a little bit more, about yourself. I noted that you're a deacon and a theologian, but maybe give us the details.
Yeah, so I'm a deacon of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church of the Kyiv Archeparchy. So that's located in the capital of Ukraine. That's where I'm incardinated. So I ask everybody watching if you could say a prayer for all the people in Ukraine and Kyiv and all those areas they're probably hearing about in the news. It's not easy, and say a prayer as well for all those who died so far. There are a lot of innocent civilians that are dying, so pray for an end to Russian invasion and for peace in Ukraine. So apart from that, I'm a deacon in the Kyiv Archeparchy. I also am born and raised in the United States and Canada, and worked in Vienna, at the University of Vienna in the past. Now I'm at the University of Regensburg, and starting in September, I'll be at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome, where I completed my studies, specializing in Byzantine liturgy. So it's history, development, theology, things like that. So historical and also contemporary practice.
What got you into that?
I was born into a family that's very involved in church life. My father's a priest, my uncle's a priest, my great-grandfather's a priest. So some people say it's kind of like a family business. But so from a young age, being present in church at services kind of gets you interested in what it is we're doing, what does it all mean. So thankfully there are opportunities in the church also to delve deeper into these questions by studying these things in academic environments that are also helpful to growing the faith and understanding.
So the Pontifical Oriental Institute, that must be exciting. I saw that they tweeted something that you posted, either tweeted or Facebooked it, one of the two. They reposted something that you had posted about a week or so ago. So that caught my eye. So that's pretty exciting.
I missed that. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll check it out. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So what all do they do over there at the Pontifical Oriental Institute?
Well, it's an institute dedicated to the study of the Christian East, and it was founded a little more than 100 years ago, precisely after World War I, where there was a lot of not just interest, but concern for Christians in the East, particularly when the Russian Empire collapsed and the Soviet Union was starting. There were questions about knowing more about particularly Eastern Europe from the perspective of the Roman Catholic Church. And so this institute was created in conjunction with the Oriental Congregation, or the Congregation for the Eastern Churches. So that's kind of the Vatican institution that takes care of the Pontifical Oriental Institute. So it has a papal charter to delve into the theology, the history, the worship, the spirituality, the canon law of the Christian East. And it's currently entrusted to the Jesuits. Actually, the first rector, if I'm not mistaken, was a Benedictine, Ildefonso Schuster, who was the Archbishop of Milan. And I think he's a saint or blessed of the Catholic Church. And since that time, then the Jesuits have been responsible for the Oriental Institute. They had a particular mission for work in Eastern Europe, and so they continue with that mission for studying the Christian East.
Yeah, didn't Robert Taft, of course, well-known Eastern Catholic, didn't he go there or teach there?
Oh yeah, for sure. So he he was the professor of liturgy there for many years. I should know exactly how many years because I was his assistant at the end there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh yeah. And so he would constantly remind people, "Oh, I've been here in Rome for 42 years. I spent more of my life in Rome than in America or elsewhere." He was definitely quite the character, and he would say, "I've forgotten more about Byzantine liturgy than you'll ever know," stuff like that. So
he would say that. That's funny.
He's from Rhode Island. Grew up in New England, Massachusetts. That kind of like good old tough humor, but he's a very kind man as well, and very very knowledgeable. He was a tough guy, but he really looked out for the underdog and people who needed help. So and so he studied there since he was a Jesuit. He was ordained in the Byzantine Rite in Campion. I think it's now called Campion Hall in Weston, Massachusetts. That's where he did his novitiate, and then he was sent to Baghdad and to Rome, and he spent most of his life as a professor of the Pontifical Oriental Institute. Then when he retired, he returned back to where he was as a novice, because since the 60s, the Jesuit novitiate in Weston turned into the Jesuit retirement home. So he was back at the same place with all the same guys, and it was quite lovely actually to see him around the dinner table with this Jesuit that was very important in Jordan, in the Middle East, working for peace, or this Jesuit who had been a professor at MIT, some kind of like astrophysics. And so he's actually buried there in the cemetery.
I'm just not to go too far down a rabbit trail. I'm just curious, what did you do as far as an assistant for him?
So it was at my task. It wasn't at the Oriental Institute. They don't have at that time they didn't have kind of TAs that were teaching stuff, but it was more like a research assistant, like go photocopy this or go get me this book, help with this kind of correspondence, go answer questions for this person here. So it was more kind of a day-to-day affairs, which was definitely fascinating, and an opportunity to talk with Father Taft every day, ask questions, some stuff that would kind of be probably off the record. That even though he was very adamant, he said, if you want to know what I think, I've written it down, it's in print. But I think there are exceptions to that rule as well.
Yeah, I would imagine so. All right, so tell us a little bit about Holy Week. What exactly is Holy Week? Why is it important to Christianity?
So I would say that Holy Week is not just important for Christians and Christianity, it's the center of everything, because it's the celebration of the Paschal mystery. So the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in one intense week. One could talk about a triduum, or in Greek, the trimeron, 3 days of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, counting back from the day of resurrection on Easter Sunday, the Lord's Day. But if you look at the way the church celebrates it, it's really a whole week of entering into this mystery gradually, slowly, until you get to Christ on the cross.
Yeah. Now, I imagine then, especially in the Eastern tradition, but I think that the case is true as for the Latin Rite as well, that it's Easter that's the pinnacle there. Can you maybe briefly talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, of course. In the Byzantine tradition, during this time of Holy Week, we have lots of hymns that explain what we're doing, and one name for Easter in some of these hymns that we sing on Easter morning, that Easter, or Pascha, or the Passover, the Passover from death to life, from Egypt, from slavery, bondage, to sin, to Passover to the promised land through the Red Sea, dying and rising, happens through the death and resurrection of Christ. And it's the feast of feasts, the festival of festivals, of all solemnities, the greatest. And so, it's the pinnacle, the calling of our whole life to live that life in the resurrection. There are many other days throughout the week in Holy Week that kind of build up and lead up to that.
It seems like in the Byzantine tradition, just personally, I would subjectively say that it seems like whenever the priest says Christos Anesti in the liturgy, that's the height of it. That's the exclamation that he offers that kind of, to me, is the pinnacle of everything. What do you think of that?
Yeah, the whole point of the Easter celebrations is this proclamation of the good news, the Evangelion, the gospel, which is that Christ is ultimately risen. Christos Anesti. And the response, Alithos Anesti. Christ is risen. Truly, he is risen. In various languages, I think you can find a Wikipedia page with, the Easter greeting, Christ is risen, in many different languages. I think they probably even have like Klingon or something.
Right.
So that is the core of our faith, because St. Paul reminds us that if Christ didn't die and rise from the dead, then our faith is in vain. And so that proclamation of the joy of the resurrection is crucial there. And I think there's like a saying where Father Alexander Schmemann, an important Orthodox liturgical theologian, I think he's on record as saying, on Easter morning, you don't pray, you just celebrate, because the service is so joyous. It's supposed to be this kind of just exuberant proclamation of the resurrection of Christ. So I think you put your finger on it, that the whole summary of that is when the priest or whoever exclaims that Christ is risen, no matter, after the death of Christ, the crucifixion, gruesome passion, and the burial, there's that news of the resurrection that permeates our whole life, and it's valid 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, throughout your whole life.
I sure am looking forward to saying that part in the liturgy. So let's get to the heart of the topic, and that is the historical attestation and development to Holy Week. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so, if we're asking when did Holy Week begin as a celebration, you could kind of answer it in two ways. It would be technically, historically, we have attestations of a fully developed celebration of the liturgical services of Holy Week in the 4th century through this pilgrim nun or pious woman. It's unknown her exact identity. Her name is speculated to be Egeria, and she probably came from southern France or northern Spain and visited Jerusalem, Mount Sinai, the Christian East around the year 380. And so she kind of gives a play-by-play narration in Latin, because that was her preferred language, of what was going on in Jerusalem at the holy places that she visited at the services. However, that would kind of just be let's say the historical presentation of Holy Week as a liturgical celebration. But if we really delve into the content of the services, we see that the whole framework of Holy Week, as it's celebrated in the Byzantine Rite today and in early Christianity in the first millennium in Jerusalem, the whole framework is actually given by the Gospels. The Gospel narrative gives us that whole sequence of events, and you can actually see that there's if you kind of do a biblical chronology of taking various pericopes or Bible verses from the 4 Gospels, you can put together a kind of chronology that we still follow today in the Byzantine Rite. So I think there's a slide about that if you want to put it up on.
Oh, yeah, let me bring it up here. Let's see. There we go.
Yeah, so basically we have, we know that according to the Johannine chronology, Christ is being crucified at the same time that the Paschal lambs are being sacrificed in the Temple of Jerusalem. So that's on Good Friday. And so that means in preparation of the Passover. And if we count back 6 days before the Passover, in John 12:1, we're on the day of the Saturday before that. So actually, for those who follow the Gregorian calendar, so all Roman Catholics or Byzantine Rite Catholics that follow, like probably in the United States, I think Melkites or Ruthenians or Ukrainians follow the Gregorian calendar, then today is 6 days before the Passover, according to the Johannine chronology in the Gospel. So today is when, in the Byzantine Rite, the resurrection of Lazarus is celebrated. So we have that attestation in John 11:1-45, which is celebrated on the morning. And then presumably 6 days before the Passover, Jesus is in Bethany with Lazarus, already raised from the dead. And so that's basically what's going on, probably your local time, Saturday kind of afternoon, 6 days before the Passover. And then we have kind of the synoptic Gospels, and John more or less present events from that point on, from John 12 and from the Gospel of Mark and Matthew in particular, for a sequence of days until we get to the mystical supper, the Last Supper, Christ with his disciples. And the space in between that, we have on the next day after the resurrection of Lazarus, we have the entrance of Christ into Jerusalem, so Palm Sunday, which is attested in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the proclamation of Christ as blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna, he's being greeted. And then it talks about him entering Jerusalem. And in the Byzantine tradition, those days between the entrance of Christ into Jerusalem and then the mystical supper, or what's going on Holy Thursday, which is recounted in Matthew 26, we have basically 6 chapters of the Gospels from Matthew 21 until Matthew 26 that give the themes for those 3 days, from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Christ is in the temple teaching the apostles. He's teaching them through parables. So we have, for example, the wise virgins and the foolish virgins, the ones who are preparing for the coming of the bridegroom. So they have their oil ready. They stay up at midnight waiting for the bridegroom to come, and the foolish ones are not ready. And so actually in the Byzantine Rite, we sing hymns talking about, behold, the bridegroom comes at midnight, and blessed is the one who is found watching, and cursed is the one who is not ready. Then also there's the account of the withered fig tree and the judgment, Matthew 25, Christ coming again in glory, the last judgment, and who will be on the right and who will be on the left. So it's all kind of a preparation for then the mystical supper, which is in the synoptic Gospels. And in the Gospel of John, there's the foot washing. In fact, John doesn't even mention the institution narrative or the let's say the Eucharist at the mystical supper. For John, the most important element is service, is the example of Christ. He who wishes to be first, let him be last, let him serve, the washing of the feet. And then we see in the Gospel of John from Thursday to Friday, the high priestly discourse, that those long chapters from John 13 to John 18, Christ in Gethsemane teaching his disciples, which is on that table kind of at the bottom, I'm not sure if that's visible, the overnight from Thursday to Friday. And then on Friday we have the indications in the Gospels of on Friday at the 6th hour and at the 9th hour, this darkness. And so these hours, if you're familiar with the breviary, in the Latin Rite, or the hours, the Orologion, the book of the hours in the Byzantine or many Eastern Christian traditions and rites. Those hours, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th hour, are important moments connected to the Passion of Christ or the descent of the Holy Spirit. It's all there in the Gospels. And then many other kind of indicators in these Gospel pericopes where they say on the next day in the morning. And so there we've gotten to Christ being crucified on the cross on Great and Holy Friday, being placed in the tomb on Great and Holy Saturday, the Pharisees talking with Pilate about what to do about Jesus' body, and then early in the morning, Matthew 28, first verse, early in the morning, the day after the Sabbath, the women coming to the tomb and seeing that good news, hearing that Christ is risen. So it's all there in the gospel narratives.
Now, tell me a little bit about the development to Holy Week in the Byzantine tradition specifically.
Yeah, so in the Byzantine tradition, I mentioned this pilgrim Egeria, and you can kind of see that each of these days that are mentioned in the gospel narratives have, of course, services morning, noon, and evening, and their content is given by what's narrated in the gospel. So on Lazarus Saturday, and this is a table that shows what a pilgrim is describing from around the year 380 in Jerusalem, but for the Byzantine Rite, a lot of it has stayed pretty much the same. The content has changed a bit over time. There are more hymns. There are certain details that this pilgrim didn't describe, so we don't know. And then there's an extra things that she describes as optional kind of become standard and the norm in the Byzantine tradition today. But if you look at this, if you're able to see this table, you see that, for example, Lazarus Saturday in the morning, there's a Eucharist. So this morning, if you're on the Gregorian calendar, you had Divine Liturgy for Lazarus Saturday. Then you have a vigil this evening for the vigil of Palm Sunday, and then Palm Sunday, the celebration of the entry of Christ into Jerusalem. And then every morning and evening you have services, and their themes are given, as I mentioned, by the gospel narratives. The thing that's interesting to note is what the gospel accounts, John 13 to 18, talks about this vigil, it talks about the high priestly discourse and Christ teaching the apostles that happens after the mystical supper and kind of goes into the night, into the morning. And if you look at this table here with the pilgrim Egeria, she mentions an overnight vigil that actually has an element of procession in it. And that's something in the Byzantine Rite that we celebrate today, which is a vigil with 12 Passion Gospels. So 12 Gospels that the first one is actually this long section from John 13 to 18, read as one long pericope. So if you're an altar server and you have to hold the Repedian over that, you better be prepared. You better have gone to the gym to, lift weights in anticipation of that. Also with fasting of Lent and Holy Week, it can be difficult. But that's a very long gospel pericope that is an imitation of what Christ was teaching the disciples. And then it goes and it narrates the events of Christ being betrayed by Judas to the guards of the temple guards, then being taken before the Sanhedrin, taken to Pilate, and leading up to his suffering, his carrying the cross, and then being crucified. And that's all narrated in that night. And the difference is in Jerusalem, all this was something that happened at those holy places. So here, if you look at, here's a depiction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where this pilgrim Egeria was attending church services, and it was built by the Emperor Constantine. And if you're able to go to Jerusalem today, then you'll see that more or less the basic elements of the Constantinian church, even though it's been destroyed many times and rebuilt, they're all there. So you have the edicule of the resurrection, the Anastasis, is a kind of little house built over the tomb of Christ, the empty tomb, and there's a rotunda built around it. And there, at the time of this pilgrimage year, there was this courtyard and then this large basilica, that the basilica opened up, and Golgotha is pointed out here, and the basilica opened up out onto the street, one of the main streets of Jerusalem. You can see this again in artist rendering. So you have here the rotunda where the tomb, the empty tomb of Christ, is found in the middle of it, then this large basilica, and then you have the main street, one of the main thoroughfares of Jerusalem that led out into the whole city. So it was called the Cardo Maximus, the north-south axis of the street. And this service, this vigil from Holy Thursday to Friday, actually was today in the Byzantine Rite. We just stand in the church in one spot and we read we read the 12 Gospels, and they're interspersed with various hymns and psalms. But in Jerusalem, in the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, even the 8th century, there were processions, and perhaps even in the Crusader times, in the 12th century, when this was possible again, when Christians were in control of the Holy City of Jerusalem, the service consisted of a procession to all these places where Christ was teaching the apostles, where he was being led, and ending up at Golgotha, where he was crucified. So in the Byzantine Rite today, we have a certain level of continuity between what was going on in the 4th century and today, but the kind of approach to some of the way that the celebration takes place has changed, because back then they would be on the move. They would be praying at the places where this is happening, and today we kind of stand in place, and the only people that really move around are the priest, the deacon, the servers in church, and at most the procession around the church on Holy Friday with the shroud, or on Easter morning when we leave the church to proclaim the resurrection.
So if you're moving around, this was a pretty long liturgy, huh?
Oh yeah, the whole thing is now today in the Byzantine Rite, there are very often debates. For example, this service of the 12 Passion Gospels, it's called orthros, or matins, or utrinya, so it's a morning service. So some people say, well, it should be served in the morning. But in many places, whether you're Greek or Russian or Serbian or Ukrainian, most likely you'll be serving it in the evening, so probably 6 or 7 p.m. Well, then people say, well, what time should we be serving it? And the real answer is that you start it whenever you have to, so that it's an all-night vigil. Originally, that's how it was in Jerusalem, and the idea was that it was really keeping vigil with Christ. Christ says, keep vigil with me, pray with me in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is what not just early Christians, but technically even monks in the Byzantine Rite today are very often doing, that it's like an all-night service.
Wow. So what are maybe some of the differences that you've noticed between Holy Week in the Byzantine tradition versus the Latin Rite, especially in the first millennium? But if you have any examples in the second millennium, those too.
Well, yeah, so I have to say I'm not as well acquainted with the Latin Rite as I should be. I can say that from contemporary practice, there are a few things that immediately come to mind, and those would be that comparing Byzantine Rite and Latin Rite, there's a lot more hymnography in the Byzantine Rite. So all the structure could be more or less the same, especially in the Triduum. The themes and the content are very similar. And there are certain hymns that are even similar between the Byzantine and the Latin, right? These improperia, the hymns where Christ is saying, what did I do to you to deserve what you're doing? Did I not, feed you with manna in the desert? Did I not heal your sick or your or you're blind, or you're mute, or you're lame. So there are similarities here, but the Byzantine Rite is the one where really the hymnography just kind of explodes, and there's various types of hymns, whether it's stihira or tropari or canons that are retelling the gospel themes that are being celebrated that day. So that's definitely one thing. Another thing that in the Byzantine Rite, even though there's a Eucharist on every day of Holy Week, either as with the Eucharistic prayer, I'm not sure what terminology your viewers are more familiar with, whether it's the anaphora or the Eucharistic prayer or the, I guess those are or the canon of the Mass, that in the Byzantine Rite, there are 3 days of Holy Week, so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, where there's pre-sanctified liturgy. So the communion was consecrated on the previous Sunday and distributed in a service called the Liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified Gifts. And then on Holy Thursday and Holy Saturday, there's a Vesperal liturgy, so the liturgy of St. Basil the Great that's celebrated with the Eucharist in the evening, connected to Vespers. And then on Easter morning, of course, the regular Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. But on Good Friday, Great and Holy Friday, there is no Eucharist in the Byzantine Rite. Unless, well, there's like an exception that Annunciation falls on that day. And in the Byzantine Rite, generally, the Annunciation is not transferred. So I'm not sure what it was like before Vatican II, but now after Vatican II, certainly Annunciation can be moved if it kind of gets too messy by falling in Holy Week or on Easter. Whereas in the Byzantine tradition, if Annunciation falls on Great and Holy Friday, you celebrate, you really enter into this mystery of the incarnation, that Christ is the only one who was born to die. We're all born to live eternally, and Christ is the only one that was born to die for our sins and to raise us from the dead. So the same thing with if it falls on Saturday or even Easter, these two celebrations are fused. But going back to your question, what's the difference? In the Roman Rite, there's a pre-sanctified liturgy on Great and Holy Friday, on Good Friday, from the Eucharist that was consecrated on Holy Thursday. And that's not the case in the Byzantine Rite. Also, now since Vatican II, I think there's kind of a theology of Holy Thursday in the Roman Rite that has developed, because the Chrism Mass was very often moved. The consecration of Chrism was moved to another day. And so the theology that developed after Paul VI was that it's kind of a day of celebration of the priesthood. And in the Byzantine Rite, that's not really present. In fact, it's the day when we sing a lot about the betrayal of Judas. So it's not a good thing to connect betrayal and Judas to priesthood, unless you want it as a reminder of what priests shouldn't do. So that's kind of the main difference. Although one thing that the Latin Rite, especially after Vatican II, has re-emphasized, that everything in Holy Week kind of leads up to the vigil of Easter, which emphasizes baptism. And in the Byzantine Rite, this used to be an important theme in the first millennium, and then it got lost. So all the things that are happening in Holy Week are kind of also a lead up to baptism, which would happen at the vigil, the Easter vigil, the Vesperal liturgy. And you'd baptize those preparing for illumination all throughout Lent. And then on Great and Holy Friday in the Byzantine Rite, there would have been the final renunciation of Satan and the adhesion to the joining to Christ. So these last exorcisms that the bishop would have done on Holy Friday in preparation for Holy Saturday. And then that's why on Holy Thursday, there was the consecration of the chrism in preparation for the baptism, where it would have had to be used on Great and Holy Saturday Vigil for baptism. So that's something that the Roman Rite has re-emphasized, and the Byzantine Rite kind of has lost, although people are gaining a bigger awareness. In the second millennium for the Byzantine Rite, there was a lot greater emphasis on things rather than people being baptized. So there was emphasis on blessing things in Holy Week, or kind of materializing the celebration. So the appearance of the shroud, the epitaphios, or the plashchenitsa, which is the burial shroud of Christ in the Greek and the Slavic tradition especially, is carried around the church on Holy Friday and put in the middle. And that's something that didn't exist until the 13th or 14th century, so that's a development. And then also a lot of the prayers we have in Holy Week, for example, on Palm Sunday in the Byzantine Rite, it used to not be blessing the palms themselves, it was blessing the people that carry the palms. And then later on, you see that the prayers change over time. There's actually blessing the palms, and then kind of these objects are carried as kind of mementos of those celebrations. Or in my own church, the highlight for some people is blessing the Easter basket, and which kind of replaces that's kind of not the point of Easter or resurrection, just to pig out on great pork products.
Yeah. So one thing I've noticed is that, I'm a former Protestant, so there tends to be more of an emphasis on the crucifixion of Christ. So more so Good Friday, though they don't necessarily celebrate Good Friday, not all of them, of course. But there's more of an emphasis on the crucifixion over, say, the resurrection. Whereas it does kind of seem like there's more of an emphasis on the resurrection in the Eastern tradition. Why is that? Can you maybe speak to that? I know we touched on it briefly earlier, but maybe if you can expand on that a little further.
Yeah. Well, I think so. The passion and death of Christ is certainly crucial to the Christian faith. If we're not Docetists, we don't pretend that Christ didn't suffer. This early Christian heresy, he did suffer. He was incarnate. He was fully human as he was fully God, and so in his humanity, he suffered and died on the cross. But and even though you mentioned that in the Protestantism, this is very much emphasized, and that's why you have in, if I'm not mistaken, in Protestant worship, all these passions that are composed, like Bach or whatever, and Good Friday is a day off in the German-speaking world for Protestants, whereas Catholics would maybe get a half day or even do their laundry as polemics, kind of like to hang out their laundry for the Protestants. I heard about that in Austria, centuries ago. But in the Christian East, and also in the Roman Catholic Church, I'm kind of surprised by sometimes, once in a while, by these traditional practices, for example, of covering icons or images during Lent, or this emphasis really on the passion of Christ, which of course is central. But in the East, like you say, you can't have the cross without the resurrection. You, of course, can't have the resurrection without the cross. But anytime we talk about, whether it's the third Sunday of Lent or even on Great and Holy Friday, when we sing about we bow and worship before your cross, and we cannot stop there. We always add, and we glorify your resurrection. So the cross and the resurrection cannot be separated. The same thing, the main hymn for Holy Friday in the Byzantine Rite talks about Jesus being laid in the tomb. The noble Joseph took down your body from the cross and placed it in a tomb. And in fact, in older texts of the Byzantine Rite, there's that added phrase at the end about the resurrection, which today we kind of cut. So it's probably one example where the Byzantine Rite also is trying to imitate the biblical chronology of separating out this Paschal mystery, and kind of putting the passion and death on Great and Holy Friday, the descent into Hades on Saturday, and then the resurrection on Sunday. But in early Christianity, this mystery was always united. And in fact, if you want to go way back, the Quartodecimans, or these people who celebrated the passion of and death and resurrection of Christ on the 14th of Nisan, so the day in anticipation of the Passover, they celebrated the whole mystery of Christ on that day, on the day when Christ was crucified. And then the church had to, the Catholic Orthodox faith then corrected that celebration by saying, no, we celebrated on the day of resurrection, the Lord's Day. And then kind of the whole gospel narrative, the whole mystery of Christ then kind of gets spread out over several days. But in any case, the highlight, the culmination of all that is the resurrection. So you can't have one without the other.
There's a question here from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's slightly off topic, but I still think it's worth addressing if you want to take a stab at it. I had a question about the liturgy. I've seen the liturgy of St. James celebrated facing the people. Does this mean that versus populum is an ancient liturgical practice?
Okay, I'm not sure. So the person asking the question is obviously well versed, is probably finding my very basic explanations of Holy Week perhaps very introductory, because this is jumping like to a whole other level.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's worth saying what the liturgy of St. James is first. This is an ancient liturgical tradition of Jerusalem, according to tradition attributed to St. James, the brother of the Lord, who is, according to tradition, the first bishop of Jerusalem, just as we have various apostolic sees that are connected with other apostles, whether Mark in Alexandria or Peter in Rome, or according to tradition, Andrew in Constantinople, although he was really all over the place. And so you often have liturgies named after certain important bishops or apostles of the church. So Liturgy of St. James is connected with Jerusalem. And the whole thing is this liturgy kind of died out by the 13th century in Jerusalem and wasn't really being celebrated in the churches that we would consider in the line of the Byzantine Rite. And it was revived at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. Now, the short answer here about getting back to the versus populum question is yes, certain Greek churches that have revived the celebration might serve facing the people. I'm not sure about any Slavs or in North America how people are doing it, but one should be aware that the texts that were printed in the late 19th and early 20th century were done on the basis of the edition of one bishop called Dionysius Lathas, who was the bishop, if I'm not mistaken, of Zakynthos in Western Greece, and he had studied biblical archaeology. And he had these manuscripts of Liturgy of St. James, and very often they had no rubrics. They just had the prayers or the basic kind of texts. And so he supplemented them with rubrics that he thought made sense, or in fact, scholars have pointed out they kind of invented stuff. So this rubric of facing the people was definitely not found in the Liturgy of St. James, and in fact, it would probably not really make sense in that context. So the short answer is no. It was not a practice there. That's not to say that versus populum was not ancient and venerable in certain other places, but that's a whole other question, and that in the Christian East, I'm not familiar with it.
I'd be curious, though, do you have you seen any attestation to it in the first millennium?
So again, this Western liturgy is not something I should probably talk about. I defer to other experts, but if I'm not mistaken, it depends really on the architecture of the altar and the church, and so it could be ad orientem, but then perceived as versus populum in the same way, but then that also raises the question of the posture and the orientation of the people.
Yeah.
So like if you look at a lot of early Christian churches in Rome that are still in use, whether, I don't know, St. Peter's or San Clemente or other churches like that, where literally you wouldn't be able to stand on the at the east side of the altar. At the west side of the altar to face east, because there would be this confessio or this space in front of the altar that doesn't allow that. So, but again, for the east, it's not.
So for the East, though, in the Byzantine tradition, was there any attestation to that?
Not that I'm aware of. The general practice was as it is today.
Yeah. Okay. This is from. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, we're departed quite ways
sure.
from Holy Week. So,
yeah. Are you familiar with the Triduum celebration of the neo-catechumenal way? If so, what do you think of their claim to have recovered the early Christian Triduum and Easter Vigil?
So, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, I don't know, but I'm not familiar with the details of their practice with regard to Holy Week. The little that I do know about the neo-catechumenal way is that there is a respect and an interest in the Byzantine Rite to a certain degree, and so I'd be curious to know more details about what they celebrate. I can imagine that they probably follow something close to what's in that table from Egeria, from the 4th century pilgrim, I'm guessing. But in that regard, then the Byzantine Rite is pretty close to that. And then, I would actually be curious to know what they do.
Yeah, I'm not familiar either. I've heard of them, but I don't know what their practice is either. And the other question is about piracy, so that one's unrelated. We'll have to take that one another time. Sorry about that one. If y'all had any other questions though about Holy Week, make sure to put them in the chat too at Reason and Theology. I'll give y'all a second to do that and maybe put in your last questions there. But in the meantime, was there anything else about Holy Week that you wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to touch on yet? Anything else that comes to mind?
I think one thing that I had mentioned briefly was the great number of hymns that are found that are sung during Holy Week, and for people not familiar with them, you can probably go to your local, whether it's Orthodox or Eastern Catholic, Byzantine Rite church, and hear a lot of them. And there are also a lot of convenient booklets, liturgical books for Holy Week. The Greeks have a very nice practice of putting all the services in one booklet, and people can go and follow them. There's also a CD that actually made it to, I think it was like on the Billboard top 10 or something for a while, from Cappella Romana. It's hymns for Great and Holy Friday, based on older manuscripts connected to Jerusalem. So that's definitely something that people should delve into. It like I said, it takes kind of the gospel narratives that we hear about and then applies this like typology of seeing the prophecies in the Old Testament fulfilled in Christ in the New Testament, and then it's just beautiful poetry. He who hung the earth upon the waters is today hung upon the cross. He who formed Adam is now spat upon by humans. Things like that. There's these beautiful biblical images that it's worth reflecting on even after the service at home, and kind of allowing oneself to delve into that. And in fact, it's worth saying, you had asked about the importance of the cross versus the emphasis on the resurrection. Every week of the year, Friday is dedicated to the cross in the Byzantine Rite, and Wednesday as well to a certain degree. And a lot of these hymns or hymn themes come up. So even if you don't get a chance to experience all that in Holy Week, the hymns of the Byzantine Rite found in the book of the 8 tones, or the Oktoikos, delve into that and kind of unpack that mystery. So in a way that it's possible to reflect on that every week. And then most importantly, every Sunday at Matins, Orthros, Utrenia, whether your church celebrates it on Saturday night in anticipation or early Sunday morning, there's a lot of these hymns. For example, having beheld the resurrection of Christ, let us worship the Holy Lord Jesus. Through the cross, joy has come into all the world. So we get a little taste of that Pascha, that Passover from death to life, change from the old to the new every week.
So how can we best prepare for Holy Week?
Well, if you're on the Gregorian calendar, you're basically just on the eve of it. Palm Sunday technically is like a little break between the end of Lent that would have happened yesterday and Holy Week that kind of begins on Sunday night or Monday morning. So the best preparation ideally is to have prepared through Lent, through the 40 days in a lead up to focusing in the 40 days on one's own sins and trying to get closer to Christ. And there are a lot of guides along the way, understanding who Christ is in the history of salvation through the book of Genesis and then the prophecies of Isaiah that we read throughout Lent. But then once you're in, if you didn't have a chance to do that, or if you're already there, then the best preparation really for this culmination, the resurrection, is to be able to take time every day, hopefully to go to church for some of the services, and definitely the vigil with the 12 Gospels, 12 Passion Gospels on Holy Thursday evening or Holy Friday morning, then on Holy Friday with these lamentations at the shroud or the bringing out of the shroud at Vespers, to be able to attend those, and then the Vesperal liturgy on Holy Saturday with the readings from the Old Testament, all these prophecies of Christ, and the triumphal hymns of Israel crossing the Red Sea, the Canticle of Moses or the Hymn of the Three Youths, these kind of allowing yourself to pay attention and to kind of be caught up in the just the awe and the amazement of the mystery of Christ that's lived in the church today. I think that would be it. But at the same time, if you make it to the end of Orthros or Matins on the Easter morning, you'll hear the Paschal homily that's attributed to St. John Chrysostom saying that even if you come at the 11th hour, you will get the reward. You will celebrate in the joy of the resurrection. So that's not to say, slackers, you're okay, but, everybody kind of does what they can, and hopefully being inspired by asking even the question, how can we prepare? People are conscious of the need to do something there. And I would say really the gospel is the place to start first, and then the hymns of the church kind of unpack that.
So do the Eastern rites have a chant like the Exultet?
Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, though, is the Exultet not on Holy Saturday?
Yes, he confirms that later on.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm not that ignorant of the Roman Rite. So the Exultet, in its content, it's kind of the culmination or the high point of the Holy Saturday service, connected with the lighting of the Paschal candle, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. There are themes and passages that are similar because it's quoting other biblical passages, but there's nothing like I'm trying to think. There's a one-to-one thing. My answer comes to mind off the top of my head is no, that it's a unique hymn.
Mm-hmm. So there's another one here. Why is there a difference between the Easter dates of the Orthodox and Catholics? Why did this change? Who changed it?
Yeah, okay, so the date of Easter, if we have to review, okay, it's the first, so the I mentioned the Quartodecimans, so these are the people in early church. I don't know, in your intro you say that this is both for intro stuff and also for advanced, so I don't know, your viewers might know Quartodecimans, maybe
not. I think most of the audience watching are familiar with them. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So then that's good. So basically, the First Council of Nicaea has to establish when is the celebration of Pascha, of Easter, and so it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, right? And so that's not a problem. Everybody agrees on that date until there is a reform of the calendar with Pope Gregory XIII in the end of the 16th century, when there's a correction. And so that means that it doesn't change the first Sunday after the first full moon, but it does change the vernal equinox, because that date is March, what is it, like 21st, 22nd, 23rd, something around there. Sorry that I don't have that off the top of my head. But so it's basically the point in time where the day and the night are equal in length in the springtime. And so on the Gregorian calendar, that date is fixed. And then on the Julian calendar, it's also fixed, but it's 13 days later today. And so that means that in some years, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox will be far enough away from the Gregorian date that it's also it's more than 13 days after the vernal equinox on the Gregorian calendar. So then it means it's going to be the same day on the Julian calendar. But then other times, if the first Sunday after the first full moon is within that 13-day gap, then it's going to be a different day. So the reason why the Orthodox have not adopted, except in Finland and at certain points in Slovakia and Czech Republic for the Orthodox, they have stuck with the old calendar, the Julian calendar calculation, because there was not a consensus whether everybody would accept it. In 1924, if I'm not mistaken, when the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Meletios adopted this kind of reform of the calendar for the Orthodox. But there's also some ideas that the Gregorian calculation can't be accepted because it would fall sometimes before Passover, the Jewish Passover, and therefore there are certain canonical regulations from the early church that you cannot celebrate the Pascha, Easter, with the Jews. And so there's the argument that this cannot be, that it's unacceptable to follow the Gregorian calendar. But certain Orthodox scholars, even in the 1970s, even Russian Orthodox scholars have pointed out that this is a misunderstanding of that canon. It doesn't mean you can't celebrate with the Jewish, you can't celebrate together or before the Jewish celebration of Passover. It's that you should not follow the Jewish calculations of the lunar cycles, because these had been changed after the temple was destroyed and they were unreliable at the time. And so it basically, there are good arguments to say for the Orthodox that follow the Julian calendar that there is no theoretical problem or theological problem with following the Gregorian calculation. That would be perfectly fine. And it's just a matter of adopting the Gregorian calendar fully, because the Greek Orthodox today, even when they celebrate Christmas on December 25th on the Gregorian calendar, and they follow the Gregorian calendar for everything else, but for that one crucial date, the vernal equinox, they follow the Julian calendar. So,
wow, very, very helpful explanation. Father Deacon, tell us where we can go to find more about what you're working on. Anything you could direct us to, a website or a channel or books.
Okay, yeah. Well, right now I'm actually working on an edition of a Greek manuscript that's found at the library of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Jerusalem. It's actually a book for the services from Palm Sunday through Holy Week into Easter, Pascha, and Bright Week. And I'm doing that right now at the University of Regensburg. So I think the University of Regensburg, the Center for Advanced Studies Beyond Canon, if you Google that, you'll find some information there, and relevant websites also with references to some articles that recently came out. And hopefully, God willing, I'll finish this thing by the end of the summer, and then maybe it'll be a book. It should be submitted to the University of Vienna because the German-speaking world, one doctorate isn't enough. You have to have two. So submit it there, and then hopefully if it passes, then it would come out as a book eventually. And that manuscript, popularly it's called the Typicon of the Anastasia, so the kind of the liturgical book of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's this manuscript would be recognizable, probably 50% of its content for people in the Byzantine Rite today. and the other 50% would kind of blow people away because there are hymns there that aren't attested in any other manuscript. Some hymns that are known in kind of scattered throughout the Byzantine Rite. For example, in the Ukrainian Catholic tradition, there's one hymn that's part of Matins on Great and Holy Saturday that is sung, and no Greeks don't sing it. Greeks don't even know it, and the Russians sing it kind of after Matins. And here it is in this manuscript, right in the middle of that service. And so you kind of think, well, Ukrainian Catholics have preserved some kind of tradition that goes back to Jerusalem. So, wow, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I look forward to learning more. Thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome on the show anytime, Father Deacon. This was excellent.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Michael, as well, and God bless your work.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And everybody, if y'all enjoyed this, hit the like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I would really appreciate it if y'all consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. April 15th. This will be my single source of income. So I would greatly appreciate it if y'all check out the extra content that's available to you there. And of course, you'll be supporting what we do here. All right. We'll see you later. God bless.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.